Uh, as I said before, we are like big fans of
Shit.
Spider-Man, and the Tuck McFarlane era was amazing.
And spectacular.
Yeah, yes.
Ay, creo que tenemos los audífonos al revés, ¿no? Ok. ¿Quieres darle los audífonos a Jim para que escuche?
Do you want to hear yourself?
I can hear myself. I don't need it.
Hey, hey. Hola, ¿cómo están todos? Voy a presentar en español primero y ahorita presentamos en inglés. First, I wanna talk in Spanish and then in English, okay?
Yeah. Sí.
Yeah, right now, en este momento estamos con Jim Salicrup. Puedes agarrar el Thank you so much for coming to the bar. And we are talking about the comics right now.
Yes.
So,
Well, Jim, we are so happy to have you here to have this chance.
I'm happy to be here.
Yes. I, I don't know. It's amazing to have you here. So
Thank you.
first of all, I think that the first question we can make is how you feel in Mexico.
Oh, I love it. It's I've had a great time from the moment I got on the plane to right now. Everything is people have been wonderful to me. It's an incredible welcome. I've enjoyed it incredibly. It's I feel I couldn't have been welcomed more. It's really wonderful.
Jim, let me ask you a question. Most of our audience don't know what an editor do in the world of comics. Can you explain to our audience what is the work of an editor?
It, everyone's different.
Okay.
Uh, I I used to describe it as my job was to create an environment that was conducive to
Okay.
creativity. Uh, but everyone has, there's one extreme where an editor might just be someone who comes in, it's a job, they have to get the books out on time and they make sure everything is, on schedule and whereas I'm on the other end where uh, it's almost to me the equivalent of being a director on a movie
Okay.
because you're choosing all the creative people, you're providing a direction, and you're guiding and you I hope inspiring them to do their best work, and you really I think the best editors have a vision
Okay.
of what they want the books to be like. So you look at some of the greatest editors, like Harvey Kurtzman. I mean, he was extreme. I mean, he would write and lay out the stories himself. Uh, Archie Goodwin, uh, Jim Shooter, Stan Lee. Like you could tell when a comic was edited by them, just like you could tell a movie is directed by a great director.
Yes.
So a lot of it is just personal approach,
Okay.
and I was lucky growing up to get these comics and fall in love with them, and that became my dream. I grew up in the Bronx,
Okay.
so the two dreams I had was to one day work at Marvel and live in Manhattan, and I got to do both. And with Marvel, I got to do it when I was 15 years old.
Okay.
I sent a postcard into Marvel saying, I want to be your slave, and they hired me. I guess I knew what their budgets were.
And I have another question. And you, as an editor, as you said before, you have like so much love for comics since you were a kid. So, to all our guests, we make the question that which was the first comic book that you remember to read, or which was the comic book that made you fall in love with the industry? If it can be the same one or any.
Well, I think the Marvel comics back in the '60s, like these days, there's not much difference between Marvel and DC's editorial approach. But back then, it was very, very different. And the DC stuff was very formal. It was like adults were creating the material for children. And I remember, like, even when they would run in the back of an issue, a reprint story, they would have a blurb that said, selected from the editor's round table, as if they were having a serious meeting, like the Justice League or something. Like, Julie, which store do you think we should run on the? And whereas at Marvel, when Stan Lee was the editor, it was a far more informal, personal approach. So you really felt like not only did you like the characters, but you felt like you knew the creators. Like Stan was very informal. At DC on their letter columns, when the fans would write a letter in, it would be "Dear Editor." At Marvel, it was "Dear Stan and Jack" or "Dear Stan and Steve," and they were like kids. They were, kidding around and joking with each other, just like the characters. Whereas at, DC, again, it had that formality. Superman and Batman, before he really became a Dark Knight, they were almost identical in personality. They were completely good guys. You didn't see much of their personal life. They were all good and the heroes were all bad. At Marvel, you had a sense that they were more human. The good guys could screw up. They could fight amongst themselves. They could get mad at each other. They could decide, "I quit. I can't take this." And you can't imagine Superman ever saying something like that. So I think I was just attracted early on to the Marvel comics because all the things I described, and I think that they had a sense of humor. But and speaking of sense of humor, Marvel had a comic called Not Brand Ech, which was their answer to the early Mad comics, which would make fun of other comic books. They had Super Duper Man. Not Brand Ech was just, I thought, one of the funniest comics. With great artwork by Maurice Severin and Tom Sutton. I love that a lot. But as far as early comics and all, there wasn't anything. I just loved the format so much. When I grew up, I first started reading children's books like My Little Golden Books, Dr. Seuss books. And I love the idea of words and pictures. I love stories and I love drawing. I do my lousy sketches at conventions. A lot of editors like Archie Goodwin and myself were like frustrated cartoonists. So I get to live out my cartooning fantasy when I'm at a comic book convention. But, I lost my train of thought. What was I just talking? Oh, I just loved all comics, and there were all different kinds of comics available when there was a real variety. You could tell, like Harvey comics were for little kids. There was Gold Key Comics, which did TV, cartoons, movie adaptations. They had their own characters as well. Every company had like a different personality. I like, no matter how weird it was. I love Classics Illustrated, Warren magazines. It was just a great variety. And now we're at a stage in comics where a lot of that material is being brought back in collections and hardcover books. And there's just such a richness of material. So, there's some comics, I may not even like the comics themselves, but I enjoy reading about it. So like when they do these hardcover collections, sometimes they'll have really interesting introductions, and or magazines like Alter Ego or Back Issue, when they write about the history of comic. I just love all that. I can't get enough of it.
Okay, and with this in mind, are you still reading comics right now?
Yeah.
The actually comics?
Every Wednesday I go to the comic book store and I meet a couple of
Really?
friends and we have lunch after, and it's hard to keep up. It's like one of my other heroes outside of comics was Andy Warhol,
Okay.
and I would read about him, and he would go on these shopping sprees. He had a townhouse, and I think the first floor was nothing but shopping bags. He would go shopping, but he didn't even get a chance to take the stuff. It was still in the bags. The next day he'll go out. I don't do that every day, but once a week, I'll go. And so they're like, say, Spider-Man. I've been buying Amazing Spider-Man every issue,
Okay.
but I haven't read it in a while, and I don't want to jump into the new. I want to put them all in order and then
read it
go
before.
back
Yeah.
and read them correctly. But there are. I mean, when they start a new series, like I think Eric Larson is writing Spider-Man Noir.
Yes.
So I read the first two issues of that,
Wow.
and
And do you have like a favorite writer or favorite artist right now in the world of comics?
there's so many. There's a lot of really talented people.
Yes.
I mean, there are. I love it when certain, comic true legends, and
Yes,
this
yes,
guy's
yes.
Robert Crumb, just released a new comic book, and it's different from like when you think of a lot of funny, sexy stuff he was known for. This is more like s- illustrated essays where he's like looking right at the reader and talking about the comics called Tales of Paranoia, and he talks about COVID conspiracies. He talks about his late wife. It's a lot of personal stuff, and he's someone who I think is a true genius in comics. That whatever he publishes, I'm going to buy it.
Okay.
When he did an adaptation of the Bible, I don't even think I was able to finish reading it, but anything Robert Crumb does. So there's lots of people like that. I try to keep up with the things Todd McFarlane's doing. I think my first choice a lot of times are just to be supportive of the creators I know,
Okay.
which unfortunately for my bank account, I know too many. So I like to be supportive. So if I see anything by writers I like or artists I know, I want to be supportive and see what they're up to. Uh, and then I like to be exposed to new talent and see what, if I read, good reviews about something, I want to check it out. And sometimes it's just if I see a cover that's interesting, you know,
Buy the comic,
yeah.
the
I
issue.
mean, but there's dozens of things. As I said, I'm not up to date on all of them. But like, say, Jim Owsley, who was the Spider-Man editor before me, who's a great writer. He's doing Vampirella. So, I've been buying the issues, but I'm like way behind. I have read a few, and he's really good. Uh, I could go on forever. There's so many talented people out there.
Okay, you said that, well, Andy Warhol, you named him, and I want to ask you that in your job as an editor, how do you approach with other arts to complement your own art, like movies, um, painting, and everything? How do you manage, or how do you visualize everything to complement your work?
Uh, well, we're influenced by everything all the time. You know, I always have more ideas than I could do anything about. excuse me, when I was at Marvel, you know, one of my assistants, Glenn Herdling, was very kind. You know, he said, "Oh, Jim, you have so many ideas." You know, but that's what was great about being in that environment. So, and you could take from everywhere. I mean, when I mentioned Andy Warhol, one of the things I did years ago was one of my best friends, David Anthony Kraft, wanted to start publishing stuff, but he didn't have a huge budget. And, you know, he wanted to create a magazine that would be for the comic book market, you know, the comic book stores. You know, at the time there was like the Comics Journal, Wizard, those type of magazines. So I said, why don't you call it David Anthony Kraft's Comics Interview? Because Andy Warhol had a magazine that's still going. It was originally called Andy Warhol's Interview Magazine. And the original version was great. It's like, you know, Andy had an approach which was almost like Marvel in a way. It wasn't super polished and formal. Like he would have interns sometimes type up stuff, you know, transcribe the interviews, and they wouldn't edit things out. Like, you know, now it's common with podcasts and things like that. But back then, this was almost revolutionary that you could read an interview and like say if they're being interviewed at a restaurant, they would keep in, you know, the waiter comes by, you know, what are you having? And, you know, you hear them place their orders and or talk, ask, and it just like you were being a fly on the wall around these people you're interested in. So Comics Interview came directly. I just stole the idea from Andy Warhol and just had it be about, you know, comic books. And the main magazine lasted 150 issues, and it was fun. It was like, and it's great for me now to see, you know, like there's a lot of books on comics history, and I'm someone who looks at the footnotes and then the index, and so they're using Comics Interview as a resource. You know, it may be the only place certain people were ever interviewed, because we didn't just do what other magazines did, which, you know, whoever the big star at the moment was. Each issue, it's almost like we tried to include, you know, a writer, and an artist, inker, colorist, letterer, someone, you know, from every aspect of the industry. We tried to cover, you know, distributor, publishers, you know, fans, everything. It was a great time.
And what are your thoughts about the industry of the comics right now? Because I think that maybe the work of an editor is like a little corporative in the legal corporative, like in the sense of the editor wants to sell more comics right now. So what are your thoughts about the industry of the comics right now in this moment?
Well, I'm not behind the scenes.
Okay.
So, I mean, sometimes when with the big companies, the editors may just be encouraged to focus on editing the books. Like the big companies, very bureaucratic.
Yes.
You fit in your slot. And so they may feel, look, we got marketing and salespeople. You know, let them worry about selling the comics. You just make the best comic you can, which is, you know, a good situation. When I was editing Spider-Man, you know, Marvel had a sales department, which a lot of times I'd be fighting with. And, you know, they'd say things that I thought were crazy. And I could give you a few examples. One of the things, if you look at that cover there, you know, that Spider-Man logo, to me, is the Spider-Man logo. You know, I would never use any other. And when I took over Spider-Man, each book had a different logo. And I thought, this is crazy. You know, like, because in terms of marketing, the whole idea of logos is it's at a point where you don't have to read it anymore. You just see it, and you know that's Spider-Man.
Yes.
And if you use a different thing, well, then it's not as recognizable. I mean, it sounds crazy, but, you know, And I felt one of the crazy examples is I can't believe this happened. Probably the most famous, iconic comic book logo is the Superman logo.
Yes.
I mean, you, every time you see, you don't go, "What is? Oh, Superman." Yeah, you look at it. It's like Coca-Cola. It's a trademark. I mean, a lot of you know in marketing now, they don't even want to use words anymore. They just want to have like Nike.
Image just
you know,
having the brain.
like so with Spider-Man, if they just had that circle logo with the eyes and the webs, and it's Spider-Man. But one of the things I was going to mention about DC, and I understand why they did it, but I thought it was so silly because I thought Marvel made a mistake in having the different Spider-Man logos.
Okay.
So when I became editor, one of the things I did was change them all back to the Amazing logo, and which was also the best-selling.
Yes.
So the market and salespeople like, oh, they're going to confuse it. I mean, don't you guys want to sell books?
Yes.
And because Marvel was so successful during that period, DC is like thinking like Marvel knows what it's doing. So they had Superman in several titles, and suddenly they had different Superman logos. I thought they're nuts.
Okay.
When you have like they don't appreciate how valuable that logo was. When you see the new movie, they're not using any of those other logos. They're using the classic Superman logo. If anything, they're using it from the first Superman movie where it had that sort of ice see-through kind of look, which was cool. But it's still the classic logo. So that's just one aspect where I got to get my way, but there was all sorts of arguments I would have about them, which I thought was ironic because the critics, when they would attack Marvel back then, would act as if all Marvel cares about is money and sales.
Yes.
And then all of my arguments with Marvel was me trying to sell more comics,
Yes.
and they were stopping me. But another crazy example for Amazing 300, we go back to the red and blue costume. I wanted to do something that still hasn't been done, so someone could steal this. It's okay. Did you ever get like a comic book and they accidentally printed like two covers on it? I mean, it's the same cover twice.
Yes.
So I thought, instead of doing variants where you have to buy two different, why don't we do a comic book with two different covers? But back then, Marvel also sold a lot on the newsstand, and they sold a lot in the comic book stores. So I thought one cover could be on the outside on the newsstands. I wanted that to be the red and blue costume,
Okay.
and one cover could be on the outside in the comic book stores. That could be the black and white costume. So that way, when someone buys the comic book, they're getting both covers. They're just not in the same order. And no, we can't do that. So what happened is they printed one cover on 300 and the next one on 301. Years and years later, when they're doing these big collections, $100 books, that's when they did it, where they didn't do two covers on one book, but they did the same collection.
Yes.
One had the red and blue, another one had the. So I'm thinking, I can understand someone buying a variant for a comic book that costs a few dollars.
But no.
Someone's going to buy a variant for $100 hardcover book. What do I know about marketing? But nowadays they're owned by Disney, who does know a lot about, marketing. So it's all good.
And well, you talked a little about your work with Marvel and Spider-Man. I have the question that which was your favorite part during your work with Spider-Man or in any work? We think in Spider-Man, but maybe in anything you did.
There's really I'm not good at those questions where they ask what's your favorite. Uh, it's from the very first day I was working for Marvel, especially my first day. I felt like I was a mere mortal who was transported to Asgard, and I was among the comic book gods, which I was, and I could. I was like the first person in the office. I mean, it was like Christmas every day. I just wanted to be there so much, and I enjoyed just looking over the artist's shoulders and see what they were drawing or coloring. Or it was a magical experience, and that has never changed. Like I was at Marvel for 20 years, and over the years, I worked at. We did Topps Comics. Uh, I worked for Stan Lee again, and he had an online thing, stanley.net or Stanley Media. Uh, I started a kids graphic novel company with Terry Nantier called Paper Cuts. Did that for almost another 20 years, and Mad Cave Studios recently bought it, so that's continuing. They do stuff like the Smurfs and Asterix, which is some of the greatest comics in the world, and and it's just something that there's been such variety, and I got the opportunity to work with so many great writers and artists. One story I like to tell, you know, a lot of people grew up with 60s comic books that were approved by the Comics Code. We tend to be, very moral, good people. So, the only thing I think I ever stole, and I like to say I just haven't returned it yet, is I had an English textbook in the fifth grade, and it included a story by Ray Bradbury. And I just haven't returned it yet. And I never imagined that one day at Topps Comics, I'd be editing Ray Bradbury comics. And even more unbelievable is there was a comic convention in Los Angeles, and I was on the same panel with Ray Bradbury, Jack Kirby, Don Heck, and others. It was mind blowing. And, like every time I think, well, this can't be topped, I'm working on another project that is like incredible. And, discovering new writers and talent, it's just exciting, but particularly when I was editing the Spider-Man stuff, I would say to people who would ask, uh, how can we expect the audience to like what we're doing if we're not excited about it, if we're not enjoying it? So I think that comes through. If you're working on things, I mean, I wish everything I worked on turned out wonderful. There's been a lot of failures, like, when you have deadlines and books have to come out at a certain time, like you may have an artist who seemed like a good idea at the time, and you're halfway through. Well, what are you going to do? Can't start over again. I mean, you're never going to meet the deadline. So you try to make plans, for the next issue to get better, or do whatever you can. But a lot of times I made lots of mistakes, but it's always been a learning experience. I feel I know more now than I did back then.
Ah, So when you revisited or recheck your work, do you think, maybe I want to change this, or
Yeah. Oh, there's probably a story in there. It'll take me forever to find the panels, but maybe you could find it. It was an amazing. Is that amazing, or
it's
that's
all
the? Oh,
Spider-Man?
so it's not in there. There was, I think, it was during the Inferno storyline,
Yeah.
Yes.
and
The crossover with the X-Men Inferno.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there's a scene where I think it's Peter and Mary Jane are in a taxi going through a tunnel, and there's like flying sharks,
Yes.
and Spider-Man, Peter shoots his webs at the sharks, but I think those were bi-weekly issues, and Todd or whoever was helping him ink it, they left out that figure shooting the webs.
Yes.
The webs are just coming from nowhere. And that's been reprinted a million times, but it's still, like that.
Yes.
And I had a question that I just vanished, but when you were when you were working with Spider-Man, how was working with Todd McFarlane? Because he's like a comic book legend now. He's very big, and like you, yes, of course, like you.
Well, no, Todd's a tad more popular, I think it's safe to say. I'll be back. And it was when I first met Todd, he was right away I knew he was a smart guy, because it was at a time where Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief, and a lot of top talent was feeling a little constrained. Jim could be very specific how he wanted certain things done, and for artists, everyone wants to do things. I mean, that's what they have to offer, what their vision is. So a lot of them were leaving Marvel to get a good deal at DC. I mean, DC was desperate. Oh, we could get some top Marvel guys. So Todd said, well, everyone's going from Marvel to DC. I should try going to Marvel. He was at DC at the time. And one of the things he drew was Batman Year 2. And what happened was they gave it to an incredibly talented artist, Alfredo Alcala, but they didn't really give him the right direction. Alfredo was working at Marvel a lot of that time, particularly on the black and white Conan magazine, Savage Sword of Conan, where they would give him layouts by John Buscema. And Alfredo would go to town, like embellishing it. He had a very detailed, ornate style. Like if you saw Buscema's pencils, it's very sketchy, like figures, indications. But he would render it. It would be like tons of detail and beautiful line work. Master artist. So he assumed it was like the same thing. They're giving him a Batman story. There's these interesting layouts, but he's going to draw on top of it, which was incredibly frustrating to Todd, because he's trying to make an impression, and his style got completely consumed by Alfredo's style. His layouts were still there, but it wasn't, Todd's work anymore. So he came over to Marvel with the photocopies of his pencils, and Mark Grunwald, who was executive editor, or an editor at the time, brought him around to all the editors looking for, what was available. And I think he got to do the Hulk as a result of that, an issue of G.I. Joe, I think, and I wanted him for Spider-Man. But if you've seen Todd at conventions and you see this confident, great public speaker, that's not the guy who was in my office. The guy that showed up that day seemed very quiet. He was like bent down. You almost had to strain to hear what he was saying. Very humble. But at the same time, even if I was possibly going to offer him Spider-Man to do, he was already wanted conditions, which he didn't know that I already arranged to go back to the red and blue costume. So when he was saying, if I was to do Spider-Man, I'd only want to do the red and blue costume. It's like, okay, no problem. Okay.
The organization.
Okay, we got to go.
Yes, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. It's great meeting you guys.
It's an honor to meet you.
Oh, it's an honor meeting you
We
guys.
are going to see you there in a moment or tomorrow. But
And
thank you
Okay.
very much.
If you
I'll
want
be
to
here.
return, because we
Oh.
have a lot of questions.
Oh, no problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let me see if I can get out of this chair.
Yes. Pues estuvimos con Jim Salicrup aquí. Estuvo increíble, solo que se tuvo que ir porque tiene cosas que hacer. Vamos a finalizar esa transmisión. Estuvo muy divertido. Espero que les haya gustado. Esto se va a guardar. Pero pues pasó. O sea, es que ni siquiera estaba organizado que él viniera ahorita. O sea, lo teníamos planeado. Pasó enfrente de nuestro puesto. Le dijimos como de, oye, tenemos este podcast. Cuando te quieras sentar, ven. Y dijo, ahorita me siento. Y pues ya lo tuvieron que se lo tuvieron que llevar. Sí, voy a cortar, pero va, güey, increíble. O sea, increíble Jim Salicrup. A ver si lo podemos regresar mañana o al rato. Adiós.